Hi guys, welcome to the Philosopher Podcast. I'm your host. My name is Jiggy Jr. and today we're going to talk about the human condition, suffering, satisfaction, and other stuff that make it awesome yet tragic to be human. And my guest today is a newspaper columnist of Sunstar Bacolod. He writes in an article he calls, in a column he calls existential introspection. And he's also the EVP of Gateway Philippines, the distributors, the dealers of such cars as Kia, BMW, Geely, MG very soon, and other car brands. My good friend, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, it's Mr. Michael Goho.
Good afternoon, Jiggy. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Mike. Thank you so much for doing
Yeah.
this.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah. I wanted to talk to you about the human condition, Mike, because I ran into one of your columns, one of your articles in Sunstar Bacolod called Existential Introspections. One of the columns that you wrote was about the human condition. And I know that you're dabbling in philosophy, and I would even venture in saying that you're a budding philosopher. And based on my previous conversations with you, I think you'll be very adept in kind of talking about the human condition. Anyway, you have been a human being all your life, right?
Of course. I'd like to think so.
So in a way, you have a lot to say about the human condition. And of course, I'd like our viewers and listeners to pitch in and whatever they think about our conversation. Maybe you can agree or disagree or add to whatever conversation that we're having right now. Again, our topic is the human condition, suffering, satisfaction, and other stuff that make it awesome yet tragic to be human. So let's talk about suffering first, Mike. Let's get the suffering out of the way first. How do you define suffering? What to you is suffering?
Well, suffering is basically pain, hardship, and that's something we encounter every day of our lives, and it's really part of our programming. It's rooted in us as human beings, that all of us have this predisposition to pain and to experience difficulties in our lives.
So why do we suffer? Why do we have to suffer? Was it because I know there's a biblical passage that sort of indicates that it was because of Adam and Eve that we are suffering, right? When Adam and
The
Eve
fallen
partook,
nature.
when Adam and Eve partook of the tree of knowledge and ate the fruit, that began. There was a cascading effect of all suffering in the world today. Is because of that act alone. So my question is, was it because of that? That's why we're suffering, or is there a deeper and a bigger purpose for all of this so-called suffering?
Well, of course, we can't get to the root since we weren't exactly there. Or we don't have enough. We didn't have enough tools then. But
Okay.
of course, it's an inevitable reality that we experience this pain, all of this suffering that we go through, and that's really what they say in Christianity, that it's part of our fallen nature, where it's inescapable, that it's really something we go through. We get betrayed, we get stabbed in the back by even our friends, our closest associates, sometimes even our family members. That's why we experience like people who steal or people who commit crimes that add to chaos and destruction in our world. And it's really a sad state to be in. But it's also in a world such as this where we're also able to experience good things. Because if everything was in place or aligned or everything was just good, we wouldn't know what's good. If everything was perfect, then we wouldn't be able to distinguish or experience that sense of gratification.
Because we suffer, we feel gratification. if there was no suffering, there would be no gratification.
Yeah, it's a balance.
Contrast, right?
Yeah, it's a world where we experience evil, good and evil.
So is that why we suffer? It's because it's necessary for us to suffer so that we will feel good, we will feel gratitude, like you said.
It's part of our
so
journey.
is- so-
It's something we attain to. Of course, we want to experience bliss, happiness, meaning. That's why most of us, all our lives, we look for something meaningful and worthwhile to embark on. Which is why we look for jobs, because it's meaningful. It provides us livelihood. It makes our lives more comfortable and satisfying if we attain good relationships, a good career, and that's part of the whole journey that an adventure that we embark.
So are you saying, are you suggesting that suffering is part of the adventure?
Definitely.
The human experiment, as some would
Definitely.
put it?
Like, take an example as simple as going to the gym. Like, if you want to achieve a certain chiseled look, or you want to achieve a certain weight, or whether it's a fitness goal, then of course we go through that program to achieve that, and that's essential in achieving that.
It's good that you mentioned going to the gym, because I will give you two examples of suffering that I want you to speak to. I'm not a hardcore gym buff, right? But I do go to the gym. But I see a lot of gym goers who suffer so much, who carry so much weight, and they're in so much pain, right? And in a way, they're suffering so much, but they like this kind of suffering.
Yeah, they enjoy the suffering to achieve that result,
But
and it makes it more gratifying.
contrast it, if that same pain that gym guy is feeling was because of disease, for example, and it's the same level of pain that we're talking about here, then
Well-
that's another story, right? That's another suffering, but
Well,
the
it
pain
was
is the
Nietzsche
same.
who said, Friedrich Nietzsche, are you familiar?
Yeah, of
he
course,
mentioned
yeah.
what doesn't kill you makes you stronger,
Yeah.
right? So it's part, like you told me earlier about your experiences as a young man when before you embarked on this career, and how you went through some difficulties early on.
Yeah.
So that's part of the journey of what made you who you are today. So same way when we started this company, Gateway Motors, it wasn't easy. We didn't sell plenty of cars right away. We had to struggle with all sorts of issues, HR, operations, and we didn't know the business, but we had to learn, and we had to go through all that hardship where we had to do our research on the car industry because we didn't know anything about it.
So you're saying that we need to suffer.
Yes, definitely.
Suffering is a necessity. If you do not suffer,
Every day we're suffering.
you're
For example, if
you're not a human
experience-
being. I mean, like you become, you don't feel the entire experience of being human, because there are some people who, I'll give you an example of people who are born with a silver plate, right? On a
Yeah.
silver plate, like people who
They
are,
suffer too. Those rich people.
they're
That's why
born-
there are rich people who
Yeah.
commit suicide,
Yeah, yeah.
who experience mental issues,
Yeah.
or who have.
It could be that they didn't suffer early in their lives, right? You're saying that these people who live off the wealth and the suffering of their parents
they
are
suffer.
also suffering because
Yes.
maybe
It's
they
a different journey subjectively for each of us.
could it be that they didn't suffer early in their lives? That's why they're suffering now. They weren't trained they weren't built to face the world as it is now. That's why those people who are born with a silver plate on their tables suffer still, even though they
Definitely.
have all the resources in the world, because they weren't ready to face the
Definitely,
world
that's why
of suffering.
there are some parents who spoil their kids early on, and when they grow up, they become douchebags or assholes because they didn't go through that difficult experience. So they think the world is just a bed of roses or it's easy. So once they grow up and they didn't experience hardships, or they were spoiled by their parents.
Mhm.
So as a result, it has other implications, and eventually they suffer as well. For example, if their parents just paid their tuition to go to school or to go into a good college and just paid off their teachers, but eventually, once that person goes into a career, let's say in business, it's it's gonna falter. Things will fail. It's gonna fall into place.
Or he thinks he's gonna just gonna have to pay off everybody.
Yeah,
Right?
and that's not sustainable.
Yeah, yeah.
Like he may get away with it once
Yeah.
or a few times, but that's not. Eventually, like his actions will catch up with him.
So you can't ever envision a world without suffering.
No, definitely our world is full of suffering and malevolence. Either way, rich or poor, the rich people suffer. You hear about these stories of rich people having their lives in chaos when they have too many mistresses who try to treat them like milking cows and really suck out every bit of their wealth. So in a way, it's a sad world where it's become very transactional. And
So we become better human beings because of our suffering. I heard somebody once say, we are defined by our suffering. We become who we are now because we suffer. Without it, we wouldn't be chiseled. We wouldn't be molded into the people that we are now. But see, the thing with suffering, Mike, is that sometimes it traumatizes people. It ruins people. Sometimes, especially if they're not ready for that sort of suffering.
yeah, and that's a sad reality when things are not in place. And that's the great danger if people don't know how to deal with suffering. That's why we have many people look for psychologists or they take psychiatric meds. It's to fill that void or to appease their sense of anxiety about the destruction. Like they can't handle it, so they need some options to alleviate that suffering in some ways.
So it's not true all the time that whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, because sometimes whatever doesn't kill you, whatever suffering that you may have endured may not kill you, but it ruins you, especially here in the mind.
Exactly. That's why the mind is a fragile thing. That's why humanity is easily, like, it's fragile. It's easy to tear it apart. And that's why we have to value our lives and ensure that there is that alignment and things are in order. Otherwise, if we're on this chaotic path, then we would just go on this downward spiral that doesn't end. Then it could eventually lead to nihilism or hedonism or a destructive path.
You know, I was just reading, or actually listening to an audiobook called "Can't Hurt Me" by David Goggins just a few weeks ago. And you know, he suffered so much during his young life when he was a kid and he was a teenager, that you know he basically had nothing, and he wanted to be in the Navy SEALs, right? And he went through so much. He suffered so much. In fact, he turned things around and he made suffering a friend. You know, his thing would always be stay hard. You know, he's always, you know, he's ran I think 100 ultra marathons. You know, he craves for suffering because it tells you what you can do, what your limits are, and you know, it enables you to know what else you can do because of the things that you've gone through. In fact, there was a part of the book that said that he was running a marathon or a ultra marathon with his right leg broken or something like that, and he was able to finish that marathon even though his legs were broken. So he was able to suffer. He was able to grit it out and become a better person. What are your thoughts on that kind of mentality?
Well, it boils down to finding meaning, fulfillment, and it's also about character development. So we go through this journey of difficulties and we bounce back from these experiences and we come out a better person. I think essentially that's the core uh, outlook we embark on as human beings. That we go through each day, we're presented with different trials and different problems. Like, di ba, wa may kahumanan atong mga problema sa kalibutan, whether it's relationships, basin gibuwagan ka or your girlfriend slept with someone else, or your business is failing, or like the COVID pandemic, which is like causing a lot of deaths and destroying the economy and businesses. It's part, but as I mentioned some time ago, I mentioned about the resilience of humanity and how we're able to find solutions using our uh, intelligence and sense of common good, sense of morality to come in solidarity to help one another and come out
So
better
so
than we were previously and come out stronger.
because of the suffering. So, Mike, so suffering is an integral part of humanity. Suffering is part and parcel of how we become better people. Um, so there is no way to lessen the suffering. Would you want to lessen your suffering? Would you like to lessen the suffering of your brothers and sisters? They say that we, like you said, we all suffer, right? I think it's not about not suffering, because we all suffer from something, right? I think what we do is we choose what we suffer for.
Well, it's not about escaping suffering,
Okay.
but it's about facing suffering head
Okay.
on
Okay.
and finding meaning in our suffering. Because most of us want a quick fix, or we want to escape.
A good life.
Like
you want a better
example,
life.
if you when you wake up, it's nicer sometimes to just lay in bed and just relax all day
Exactly,
and
yeah.
face the responsibilities that
Yeah.
we need to do throughout the day. But if we keep going on that path where we just take things lightly and not face the suffering head on, it's gonna pile up
Mhm.
all the more. Like if you fail to show up in Y101 for a week, I'm sure all the projects or all your responsibilities are gonna pile up.
Mhm.
So the burden is gonna be heavier on you later on.
So we have to choose our suffering, right? I mean, we would like to choose what we suffer for, what we strive and
face
struggle for.
our suffering head on. We take responsibility. It's not a wash hands approach where we just pass it on or let someone else shoulder, because that would be detrimental.
No, what I'm trying to
also
say is,
our
like for example,
character
the person
development.
going to the gym, right? He
Yeah,
chose to go to the gym.
That's a simple analogy.
Yeah.
A person going to the gym
He's choosing
has a
that
goal,
suffering.
whether it's vanity to look better naked,
Whatever his reason
for
is.
health.
You chose to suffer in your business. You chose to have business problems because you're a businessman.
Yeah.
So we choose our suffering.
We choose what journey we embark on,
Yeah.
whether whatever career path you
Yeah.
choose, whether it's in business, whether it's in show business, whether it's being an employee. It's a different, people chase after different things.
Do you
Because there are
think
some people who wouldn't want to be businessmen because they don't want that heavy load of having so many responsibilities. Sometimes it's not for everyone. Like some people excel as entertainers, but they fail miserably at in
entertaining
another
people?
career path. That's why each of us, we have different skill sets, we have different talents, we have different wiring,
Yeah.
we have different personality traits, so we have different gifts. So each of us, it's a responsibility for each of us to seek truth and seek what is meaningful in our lives.
And we suffer for that.
Yeah, the suffering is part of that.
Okay, we're just talking about the suffering that we choose. How about the suffering that you did not choose? Let's just say, for example, a child with cancer. How do you explain that kind of suffering? Who or why does a child who just was brought into this world
Well,
need to suffer? Why does a child like that need to suffer?
Well, in the world,
How do you
there,
explain
there, there
suffering
are
like
two
that?
aspects in with that. There are things we can control. Like now, I can make certain decisions. Like I can either go home, go out somewhere later, and there are aspects that we can't control. The weather, conditions. So it's a matter of balancing the two in this journey of life.
So, but I'm asking you about that child with
The
cancer.
child with cancer.
How do you explain that kind of suffering? Who brought about the suffering in that child who was innocent, who has nothing, didn't do anything wrong? Why is that child suffering?
And that's what I say.
What's
that,
going on, man?
that there are many uncertain things. Like life is full of uncertainty. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. We don't know. We didn't know about the pandemic affecting every aspect of our lives in this manner. So there are things.
So you can't explain the
we-
suffering of a child.
we cannot see, but what's inevitable is we experience sickness, cancer, death,
Decrepitude, death,
accidents,
aging.
unfortunate
But those are
events.
natural processes, natural progression of what it is to be human. But I'm talking about a child suffering. Do you have an explanation to that? Why does a child need to suffer?
That's exactly my point. We see children get struck with cancer. It's part of life that anything can happen. And that's exactly what I've been saying about suffering. That anything can happen to you or anybody.
Without any reason.
Yeah. Or things that we cannot grasp or explain.
So you're not
But
going to
we
offer.
can simply
You're
hope.
not going to offer
But we
some
can
sort of an explanation why a child needs to suffer.
We cannot explain the uncertainties of life, but we can control how we respond to things that happen.
So how do you respond to a child suffering like that?
Well, there are programs like treatment, chemo, and all that. That's why there are many programs also where we try to alleviate poverty, or that's why the government, hopefully they do something about that, because that's part of the malevolence we experience. And that's why when we were hit by this pandemic, it was quite clear that we weren't prepared. The world wasn't prepared for such a horrible pandemic. So,
You know,
but then naninguha jud ta, 'di ba? Like vaccine gipadali, hospitals, doctors, like they did everything in their power with all the necessary treatment options to lessen with the mask mandate, with the lockdowns, which was a hotly debated issue, whether it was better or not, whether it was the right decision. So these are all solutions that humanity comes up with to, again, alleviate suffering. Otherwise,
It's good that you
it's
mentioned-
about responsibility.
It's good that you mentioned the pandemic, because never before in the history of man, at least for a long time, that we are suffering from the same thing, all 7.8 billion of us, from the same pandemic. We all are feeling this whole pandemic thing, and everybody is suffering because of this. They know, if not themselves, their family or friends are suffering from it. They probably know somebody who have died from it, not just here in the Philippines, but all over the world. So we have a collective suffering. The entire globe is suffering from something. What do you think will come about from this suffering that all of us are suffering together?
Well, there's a commonality in the suffering we face. Like, I'm sure you've met someone who was affected with COVID, or you know a person who knows a person. So it's sort of, to me, I think this was sort of also like a wake-up call to further attest to our fragility as human beings, and which is why we'll come out stronger after, hopefully, this pandemic reaches a close in maybe a year or two, and then we learn from this, and we come out stronger and better. And that has been reflected, as shown in news cycles. Like, yeah, we didn't realize.
So do you think this will unify humanity, unify the Filipino, because we suffered together a pandemic?
In a way,
Do you think we will learn the lessons
because
of
I
the
think
pandemic?
somehow some people realize the fragility of life because of instances like a pandemic. Then they find out what truly matters. Like lately, we realize we can hold meetings through Zoom, or we can utilize business online, and we don't spend so much on unnecessary extravagances. Like there are many realizations, and some families have come closer because they've spent more time at home. But there's a stubbornness also to humanity, which is why I think there's an area or a percentage of the population who still would fail to learn or realize whatever lessons we learned from the pandemic. Naman sa yung mga gahig-u or naman sa yung mga labad. So, naturally, ang tao gahi sa jug-u. Like, we can learn from this, or some will turn out worse from this pandemic. But basically, this situations like this have tested us.
I guess the good kind of suffering.
And that's part of the freedom we've been given. We have the free will to respond however we want, whether it's towards destruction or towards the good.
Towards growth, towards developing
growth.
to becoming a better person, right? So suffering is actually, it can be a good thing if you learn from it and become a better person, come out a better person in the other side. But the other side of suffering, like you said earlier, is that sometimes
It
suffering
can make some people
destroy
worse.
you and
Yeah.
traumatize
Because
you.
some people can't take it, which is why suicide rates are up, or they go on a path of destruction, like they drink, alcoholism, womanizing, filling a void, drugs, whether it's gambling, or other forms of escapes. That's what you call escape mechanisms.
To escape from a suffering?
Yeah, for example, if you broke up with someone, naturally, di ba, magmaoy, di ba, muinom ang tao.
So you're suffering right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then how you handle it, di ba, uban mag-inom hantod ka ng kuan na jud. Like they become drunkards and they can't bounce back. But sometimes that could be temporary, where someone just drinks and
one time
for like a few weeks just unloads to their friends, which isn't really the solution, because there are different types of friends also who condone bad behavior or make you worse, and that's why it's hard to find true friends also, but that's a separate topic. But the point is, most of us have these coping mechanisms, and sometimes they're not necessarily what's good for us. Like, let's say if you lose your job, then you feel sad, then you use alcohol as an escape, because alcohol perhaps you consider alcohol as a friend.
So you lose a job, you're suffering because you lost your job, so you turn into alcohol.
Yeah, and alcohol isn't necessarily the solution.
Okay.
It could be temporarily, but eventually you're gonna have to bounce back. You can't be drinking every day since you lose your job. Like, let's say you lose your job, you're depressed, then you drink for weeks and you fail to bounce back. That can't be good.
Mike, looking back at your life, you don't have to answer this question, but I'd really like to ask this question anyway.
Yeah.
What is the suffering that you have experienced that have molded you and influenced you and turned you into who you are now? What's the best suffering you've ever had in terms of growth as a person? If you can tell us that part of your life.
Well, there are many aspects.
Just pick one.
Maybe I can give you a few examples.
Yeah.
Like, before, I used to have a very hedonistic approach to life. I viewed life as a balancing act where you basically just self-preserved and looked out for yourself. So I did all sorts of crazy things. Like, I womanized, I spent a lot of money that I didn't really have to spend. I was insecure also, basically, because I wanted to be validated by society and people around me. But then I realized it was quite shallow. And there's also an instance where...
So so you were suffering while you were doing that.
Yeah, there was a time where I was looked down on also
Mhm.
in the workplace, or there were some senior executives who didn't necessarily like me and tried to find ways to pull me down and tried to find loopholes. So I went through experience such as that,
And you suffered.
which yeah, I greatly suffered because it was painful to, for example, be labeled as a bad guy,
Mhm.
or even if you're doing good for the business, for example, but then it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation
Mhm.
where the blame is purely on you and you're judged unfairly, or the assessment was unfair because of some people who abuse their power or positions. So there are many cases like that, but it did mold me to see how humans can be selfish, self-absorbed, and what I've learned is it's really a cruel world out there, and which is why it's important that we bounce back and we learn from the different problems life throws at us.
So you mentioned a sweeping statement there called when you said uh, it's a cruel world out there.
Yes.
Isn't this precisely because it's cruel that we suffer and we become better people? If it was such a loving and easy world, there would be no suffering. We wouldn't become
If
chiseled
it was
people like
really a
we are
loving
now.
and easy world,
Yeah.
then there would be no character development. There would be no maturity. There would be no um, professional or personal growth
Mhm.
on our parts. So all these problems we face are opportunities for us to grow and learn and become better people. And that's what we embark on, this sense of meaning, finding fulfillment. Otherwise, why go on life if there's nothing to look forward to? So every day, I assume you wake up looking forward to something, whether it's a date with your girlfriend, or spending some time with your son, who I met,
He's here actually.
who's also a great young man, who I see is very attentive in helping you out
Yeah.
with your interviews. But why does he care to do that, or why does he care to help out his father? It's because there's a relationship
Mhm.
that you have, a bond
Mhm.
that's unshakable,
Mhm.
and that's an assumption I've made, but
Mhm.
based on what I've seen.
Mhm.
Because if it was just purely a meaningless, nihilistic outlook, then he wouldn't care. He would just do his thing.
Mhm.
You'd do your thing. Why bother going to work? Why bother making an effort in looking for something fulfilling to do with life? So why do we care to go on all this?
You know, my favorite line for suffering is actually a marathoner's slogan. I don't know if you're familiar with this slogan. Uh, if you're a marathoner, it says something like, "Pain is necessary, but suffering is optional." Pain is necessary, but suffering is optional. Optional, meaning to say that if you're running, it can be painful, especially if you go half the marathon already. You could, you know, break something or stretch something, but you don't have to suffer for it.
I think it's a cliche,
Yeah.
because I think pain and suffering, they're quite they mean similar. I mean,
Yeah, but
they're
there are
they're
people
very
who-
closely tied, pain and suffering.
Yeah, they are. But again, that David Goggins example that I gave you earlier, this guy um, embraces and even looks for suffering, so
Oh.
because he knows what comes out of it, and he becomes a better person every time he suffers and runs an ultra marathon. Every time he does something difficult, he knows that it will build his character, and he'll become a better person out of that.
Yeah.
So that's just how I feel about suffering. Let's go to the next topic. Of course, just in case you just tuned in, our topic for today in the Philosopher podcast is the human condition. I'm saying that with a smile on my face because, I'm the idiot who thinks I can tackle this subject, and that's why I didn't want to be alone in this delusion of being able to talk about this topic. That's why I brought along my good friend here, Michael Goho, and hopefully we will have a good conversation about it. So our topic is the human condition, suffering, satisfaction, and other stuff that make it awesome yet tragic to be human. Our next topic is satisfaction. What is satisfaction to you, Mike?
Satisfaction is finding meaning and fulfillment, which I mentioned a while ago. Basically, it's about having that sense of accomplishment, and like you did things that you were meant to do, or you maximized your potential in who you were meant to be. And that's really what the journey is about. It's about looking for the truth in our lives. And that's ultimately what leads to what you say, satisfaction.
Isn't it the precise reason why we suffer is because we are never satisfied?
We
Is that is, isn't that one of the biggest reasons why we are suffering, because we are never satisfied?
Yeah, that's why most of us try to fill a void. Some people think that the answer to their problems is automatically to acquire millions, or to become rich, or to become famous. But then eventually, many have attested that that's really not the ultimate goal. That's why you have a lot of sad and empty billionaires. You have a lot of really depressed, sexually driven prostitutes, for example, because the answer isn't in the pleasures of life. Like, you can have as much sex as you want, or you can
But the prostitute
acquire
is
as
not
many billions. Yeah,
it-
which gives you means, but it's not what.
I don't want to
gives-
speak for the prostitutes, but that's their way of living. They're not doing that. Most of them are not probably doing that for the pleasure of it, but for the livelihood of it, right?
Yeah. And your question is exactly what.
No, I'm just because you were talking about the prostitute having the pleasures and all that stuff, and I don't think they're doing that mostly for the pleasure. I think they're doing because they have no choice.
Well, they do have a choice, but they choose to go in that because it provides easy money. But they also exchange.
So you think it's easy money?
Easy money to like just spread your legs and like have some horny old man who can pay like ejaculate and like have a few minutes of pleasure. And
So speaking of
But
pleasure,
but
is
that's-
satisfaction achievable? Are you ever going to be satisfied? Are human beings ever going to be satisfied, or should there always be a certain level of dissatisfaction
I'll
for
just-
for you to get up in the morning to be dissatisfied about one thing, about this and that?
I'll just simplify it this
Okay,
way.
okay.
Because most people, they usually say, in our life, their wish is to be happy, or the ultimate goal of life is happiness. That's what people usually aspire, right? But ultimately, I've come to realize, well, this is my subjective opinion, and I don't wish to impose my views on other people. Just to clarify that, because I'm in no way claiming to be some sort of expert or some sort of guru who has it all figured out. But this is simply an opinion. But I think the ultimate goal of life is to find meaning rather than happiness, because happiness is
Kind of shallow, right?
shallow, temporary, whereas something meaningful, it's more long lasting and worthwhile. For example, our relationship with our family, it's not always smooth, but we wouldn't trade that for anything else, because it goes deeper than just the temporary like highs and feel good moments. But of course, we also go through happy moments in our lives, but that shouldn't be the ultimate goal. Na just shallow, impulsive happiness, but rather something worthwhile and meaningful.
So you're saying that you will be satisfied if you have a meaningful career, a meaningful life, meaningful relationships. So you think that that will satisfy you, and that's
Yeah, contentment or
Yeah.
or meaning.
so contentment is contentment the opposite of satisfaction?
Contentment.
Yeah, no.
No, I think it's similar. If you're satisfied, you're content.
You're content.
So it's about the same. And like people wanna acquire
I'm sorry.
more.
Yeah.
Like, di ba, kung milyonaryo na ang tao, ganahan pa siya ma-billionaire.
Oh.
It's endless. It's an
Uh-huh.
endless cycle of feeding your ego. Whereas you can appreciate the simple joys of life, like having stability in your family, having a decent career that enables you to pay the bills and enables you to have your own time, because there's also enslavement, which could be a problem. Like sometimes you think, oh, the wealthy people, they're so well off, but then they're also enslaved to paying
So
a lot.
I'm sorry, I
of
misspoke.
bills.
What I meant was contentment is the opposite of dissatisfaction, right?
Yeah.
Being dissatisfied is the opposite of contentment. So you're saying that there are things that give meaning to your life. Therefore, these are
Yeah, and it's
satisfying
different for
things in your
everyone.
life, right?
Yeah,
it's
it's
different for
different.
everyone. But so you mentioned that family is important to you, and it gives you satisfaction to
Yeah,
be with
family,
right?
or intimate relationships,
Yeah.
or friendships,
Uh-huh.
or a career that suits you.
Okay.
Because it can be really dissatisfying if you're in a profession that you're not inclined to.
Uh-huh.
Like, what's something you don't like? For example, maybe you would dread being an accountant, or if
Probably, yeah.
probably.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not something you're inclined to, and that would greatly like cause you unhappiness.
But see, the thing is, the resistance to liking something is superficial. For example, I don't like accounting because I don't like numbers, and it's pretty superficial. Because I don't like math because I don't like numbers, and I never really delved into math sincerely for me to be able to say, hey, I kind of like this. Maybe if
Yeah.
I did, who knows? I could be.
Who knows?
I could have been a
But-
mathematician,
But
right?
that's entirely up to you.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
entirely up to your choice.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
if you did try your hand at math,
Yeah.
and maybe you would have turned out good,
Yeah.
or it would have been like
Satisfying to me
satisfying to you.
Yeah.
But then you didn't choose
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah.
or you didn't have the willingness
Uh.
to go enroll in a math course,
Uh-huh.
because perhaps you devoted your time elsewhere to do other things, like
yeah.
what
Like
you're-
radio,
what-
yeah, yeah.
like
Like
this is
talking.
something you've
Yeah.
already discovered,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you've discovered that you're good at this.
Mhm.
So it's like it's also a matter of choice. Like maybe if you went into
And luck
math,
as well too, right?
it's a mix: luck,
Yeah.
circumstance, choices. That's why life is
Yeah.
is mysterious, and it's uncertain, as I
Yeah.
keep saying,
Uh-huh.
that we don't know, but then we face it rather than shy away from it.
But
Like
so-
we voluntarily face the challenges. Like if, let's say, I wanted to try my hand in a different career, then I feel a conviction to get into that. That's part of the journey.
It is
of-
to be
of
human
facing
to go to the path of least resistance, right? That's what it is. I mean, like basically, most of us, if not all of us, want to go to the path of least resistance. We want to go to the place where it's not difficult. We want to go to the place that's easy.
But sometimes choosing the easy path does not lead us to becoming better as people.
Because we didn't suffer.
Yes, in a way. For example, if you are well off and you just spent your time like lazing around at home, Yeah, you're free to do that, but
You know, instead
but
of
I'm sure you're gonna feel empty eventually.
instead of taking over, let's say, the easy part of just taking over the family business, which is kind of easy because you're family. You
Not necessarily easy.
Mm.
Taking over a family business is a heavy burden. Like, you have to know what you're doing, otherwise
No, well,
it's gonna falter.
I know there are relationships and it's difficult and it's complicated
Yeah,
to
and
work
there
with
are
family. I know
and
that.
there
But
are-
what I'm trying to say is
There are political
if
aspects
there
behind
are
that.
if there are things, endeavors, not necessarily a family business, but there are things. So for example, you're a family of lawyers and you just become a lawyer, or you're a family of doctors, you become a doctor. So in a way, that's kind of easy and natural because that's who your parents were. They were all doctors, and naturally, they were all talking about doctor stuff. Well, you were a kid until you grew up, and
Yeah,
then
but
voila, you become a
sometimes-
doctor. So it's easier to become a doctor. And you would have probably thought in your mind, it probably crossed your mind, shit, I want to be a lawyer, man. But I grew up
And
with,
that's what I was saying earlier
Yeah.
about enslavement.
Yeah.
Just because you belong in a family of doctors, then some parents want to shove it in you to become a doctor as well, even if you don't assess that
Mhm.
that's your calling. So
Mhm.
that can be quite a problem where you perform to,
I
to
feel
validate and to please your parents who are doctors to become a doctor, but that's not what you want. So that's enslavement.
enslavement. That word that you used earlier, calling, right?
Calling, yeah.
I feel that that's a
Yeah,
very
different callings.
I feel that that's a very nebulous word. What do you mean by calling? Who knows what their calling is? What do you mean when you say calling?
It's doing what you were meant to do, and that
How-
that takes
That's
time.
very nebulous. What do you mean? How
No,
do you know
that,
what
that
you're
takes
meant to do?
time. That takes discovery, and
It
it's subjective for each of us. Like,
It takes 10,000 hours.
It-
If you're talking about the time it takes to be good at something, it's already been studied 10,000 hours.
not necessarily good at something, but something you're
Great at something, actually.
Great at something, but that's really subjective. We don't know what goes on internally in a person, so it's hard to make that assessment. People are going to have to figure that out for
Themselves,
themselves,
yeah.
like what they want to do,
Born
what
to
they
do.
were meant to do, and people struggle with that. Like, some think they want to be in the medical profession, but then later on, oh, it's too difficult, so they want a career in the arts or in business. So it's quite difficult, and that's why it's also important that we assess and know ourselves well before.
But how do you know when you're born to do something? I'll give you an example. I thought I was going to be an announcer when I was a kid, right? And I was rejected, refused. I was trained for 2 years by a radio station that needed somebody who had a really old and deep, booming voice. And I didn't have that when I was a kid because I was still a kid, right? And I
Yeah.
don't really have that, that barrel-chested voice. But I was suffering so much, and if I was a lesser person, if I didn't love what it was that I was doing, I would have probably told myself, this is not what I meant. This is what I'm not. This is not what I meant to do. I gotta go and look for something else. So how do you know this is the thing that you're meant to do?
You will.
I didn't even know that.
I think you can discern that on your own.
Yeah.
Like, if you try to work at something or you want to embark on a certain career and you fail, but there's still that desire to do it, then that's on you. That's dependent on the person. Like, we can't tell the other person's journey, but that's something you figure out on your own, I think. Like,
How
some people didn't realize they were going to be successful musicians, but then somehow somewhere along their journey, like, it led them to that. So, but some people discover their passions early. For example, like the Kobe Bryants or LeBron James of the world, like, they discovered that they have a passion and talent for basketball, then naturally that's a career path that they pursued. But for regular folks like us, it's more challenging. And that's something we discover on our own and discern for ourselves.
I heard a line that goes something like, "You can't be what you can't see. You can't be what you can't see." Meaning to say, you can't aspire for something that you've never seen, right? So I think it's all also about exposure, right? Exposure to the different facets of different careers, different kinds of
Yeah,
being,
and that's
different
why
kinds of living.
it's good to try new things rather than shy away and not try anything at all. And that's why it's part of the journey. I was saying, like, we suffer, we make mistakes, and we come out better uh, after that. And yeah, sure, we make mistakes along the way, or we were enslaved by a lot of our internal quirks and dysfunctionalities, but that's part of what makes the journey beautiful.
That's part of the human condition.
Yeah, that we.
So, um, your journey, Mike. What gave you the most satisfaction? What is your calling, if you've already found one, and how did you find it?
My calling?
Yeah. Have you found it already? And how did you know that this was it, man?
No, every day is still a struggle, but each day I wake up and try to face the different responsibilities head on and try to have that positive outlook in discovering more of who I am and discovering more of what I was meant to do, and
So have you
figuring
found your
out
calling? Are you saying you haven't found your
and
calling
also
yet?
influencing, or also making an impact in, hopefully making an impact in other people's lives, because it's also not always about us. Like, we can acquire as much or like preserve ourselves, but it's also about making an impact towards our community, or people we come into contact with, our intimate relationships,
You haven't
and doing some good in the
you
world.
haven't answered my question yet. So have you found your calling? And how did you get there? Or are you
It's-
still a work in progress? Are you still
It's still a
looking
work
for it?
in progress,
Okay.
definitely. Every day is an opportunity to embark on new experiences.
So
Like,
you're saying you haven't found what it is that you're meant to do yet.
in certain aspects, I have, but I wouldn't want to conclude directly, because our lives are full of surprises,
right?
changes. So I wouldn't want to just give out a sure-sounding statement and just like that's it. It's really part
But
of
you're
a long
satisfied
journey.
with what it is that you're doing now.
So far, it's quite fulfilling also to face the challenges in the car business also every day, and to meet different individuals, and also interact with a lot of my employees and hear their stories, or
Here they're suffering.
hear their suffering with yeah, how we manage or family dysfunctionalities or
Whatever, yeah.
whatever.
And
There
all
there,
sorts of
there are
suffering.
many challenges and problems
Are
that
you
we
enjoying
face.
the suffering with this particular journey right now, running a car dealership, a car company?
Definitely, I would say so.
Enjoying the suffering.
And it's about the mindset also,
Yeah.
that we understand certain foundations, and we embark on a more positive outlook in our approach to life in general, and
Um,
discover new things.
I'm really baffled by why people react differently to suffering. Is there like maybe like something you can say about how people should convert their suffering? What kind of mindset do you think should you impart on our viewers? What kind of mindset should one have so that they can convert their suffering and maybe turn it into something that'll satisfy them and make them become better people in the end?
Perhaps being real and true to yourself, and facing responsibilities head on, and having a positive mindset towards that. Like, I always hear Jordan Peterson say, life is suffering and malevolence, and it's a moral obligation for us to take on the many responsibilities and face these challenges head on. So it's really about having that positive attitude towards the many things that life throws at us.
I guess it's important to teach people, or at least to help them um, convert that suffering, right? Because, like you said, like we all both agree, suffering is universal. Everybody suffers. Like Jordan Peterson once said.
Well, everyone,
life is about
rich or
suffering,
poor,
right?
or regardless
matter.
of what country
It's
or
just
culture
their
or
suffering
race,
is different, right?
different, but it manifests itself anyway in different areas. As I said, relationships, family, career, work,
Kanang mga konbay, like
all aspects, health,
you know these people, right?
ailments.
Ano, mga chill, like those,
Like in Samay Chill.
Like-
Who are you referring to?
like very chill people. Those people that uh, meditate. Those people that like
You're referring to monks or
monks
or gurus or like
or that people, those people that practice meditation and all that stuff. They have, in a way, figured out how not to suffer as much as most of us.
and what about them?
What do you have to say about that? There is a way to tone down the suffering.
Of course, we also don't wanna keep suffering because lahi nam sa nang murag sa distata na ganahan jud tag sakit lahi.
I
Well,
think
that
David Goggins is a
that
sadist,
might
but
be some kind of weird
Mental-
fetish or mental
problem, right?
problem na malamian sa ka na like inflict pain upon yourself
Yeah.
voluntarily.
Yeah,
That's not what I'm
Uh,
referring to by
mm.
any means. But I would say more power to those people who are able to eradicate or lessen their suffering. But then again, it's a subjective journey for each of us. So
they're saying that suffering, problems, dissatisfaction does not exist now. This is totally a Buddhist concept. Suffering, problems, dissatisfaction are things that happened before, or things that will happen, tomorrow, or next week, or next month, or next year. Right now, this moment, while I'm looking at you, looking at the microphone, there is no suffering. There are no problems right now. We're just talking. But our problems arise when we think about, damn, the electric bill tomorrow, or the house payments next month, or something of the past, like, yes, man, I should have done this. So there is no suffering now. Suffering is actually a product of thinking about the past and the future.
yeah, and what are you
Now, what do you
saying?
have to say about that?
Like now?
Yeah, where suffering lies, where problems lie.
It's definitely part of every aspect of our lives. Even now, you say we're not suffering. I think we are suffering. Like,
Really? You're suffering with my stupid questions?
that could be. I mean, that could be a
Uh,
possibility, or like the fact that I'm also uneasy with conducting interviews. I'm also suffering in.
But this is the kind of suffering
to
that
a
we
certain
want, right?
degree. Like I also used to deal with anxiety, for example, and this isn't exactly a walk in the park for me as compared to you, but presently, I would say this is still suffering, or this is still part of the.
But we choose the suffering that we want, right?
Like I'm answering your questions in a way that makes sense to you, or that's understandable to you.
Yeah.
In contrast to me just giving you some lazy answer, right? So I'm making an effort to answer certain questions.
So you have a certain sense of certain level of suffering. In other words, that's what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay.
Same way with you, where you're trying to bring out meaningful topics
Yeah,
or
yeah.
questions that could somehow impact other lives, or questions that other people can relate to. So in a way,
It
we're
is some form of suffering.
we're
right?
also finding ways to improve this interaction and this outcome, rather than
So I think it's the meaningful kind of suffering that we look for, that satisfies us,
Yeah,
right?
like this interview, you decided to conduct this interview because there's some answers you want, or you have an objective that you want to achieve,
Yeah.
whether it's to answer certain questions or to entice some of your viewers on certain topics. So there's a goal that
This is
you're
pretty-
aiming at. There's a
but
goal.
To be honest with you, this is a pretty ambitious topic, the human condition,
'Cause-
ladies and gentlemen.
Because you do
Just for your-
interviews
yeah,
because
yeah.
for you, they bring some sort of meaning.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
there's some significance in talking to different people, getting their perspectives, or you're interviewing me to get my perspective, or maybe you're interviewing me to shove certain outlooks that you have that you may and you may have certain outlooks that you don't necessarily agree with. So that there's a healthy exchange here.
Of suffering.
Yeah, or there could be an unhealthy exchange
Yeah,
where,
yeah.
for example, one shoves their beliefs or their or whatever impositions or outlooks that they have. So there are different aspects to it. Like there are some interviewers, their goal of interviewing people is to somehow come out a winner, or come out smart, or come out the better person, or
person,
the
yeah.
wiser person, or the goal is to
Like a competition.
or shame their interviewees or put them in a bad light. And that's what Trump keeps saying also, like fake news, right? Or there are some biased interviewers who have a different agenda. So it depends, because sometimes dialogue can be unsubstantive if it's just a matter of surface talk that really don't mean anything.
You know, they say that
Or it can go deeper when two people are willing to really seek the truth in whatever question being asked.
you know, they say that we're all trying to build a world that agrees with us. You know, that's why people go to communities, you know, go to cliques, go to groups, you know, for example, the bikers group, or the runners group, or the the atheist group, or the Christians group, or the singles group, or
Yeah.
the couples for Christ, you know, for couples and all that stuff. So we try to build a world that agrees with that. So we gravitate to groups, cliques, and friends that have the same thoughts and ideas
Yeah.
as us, and beliefs as us. So what do you have to speak about that? That we're trying to build a world that agrees with us.
Build a world.
Build our world. Our world is our community. Is our clique. Is our group.
Well, it
are
depends
our
on what.
friends.
Again, it depends on what the individual's looking for.
No, but
If for them they find fulfillment in joining a group or a club, then that's their choice.
for example, you believe in something. Call it you believe that everybody should wear sunglasses because it's healthy for you. So you believe in that totally and completely with your entire being. Everybody should wear sunglasses. So what you will do is try to convince everybody, hey, you should wear glasses. This is good for you. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to build a world that agrees with you. And I think it ends with the facts, the science behind your belief, right? That if wearing sunglasses all day happens to be scientifically good for
Well,
everyone.
if there's evidence that backs that
Yeah,
up,
yeah.
then that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
But if there's not, then you're just a crazy person
Yeah.
telling people to wear sunglasses when
To
it's
agree with
when
you.
it's not necessary.
Because you don't want to be the fool.
And that's
that
why
wear-
there are many con artists out there that impose certain things, and there are many suckers out there who are led to believe. That's why there are many cults. That's why there are many people brainwashed to a certain
flat
group.
earthers.
Yeah,
I
different
think
different outlooks, different aspects.
I think.
That's why, as you mentioned, there's atheism. There's different things that people like go after.
I think the word that we can use locally is mangamong. Like you don't want to be the only person that believes that wearing sunglasses all day is a good thing. Although you have the science to back it up. You
Lagi,
have research.
pero mao na, that's,
So-
there's also that saying na sa mailad lang, di ba? Na murag, na may uban.
No, but you believe in it totally and completely in your heart.
What?
That wearing sunglasses is good for you. So dili ka wa ka nang ilad. Wa ka nang
But
ilad.
what is the objective with
Because
the
you-
wearing
Because
sunglasses?
of what you totally and completely believe. You want to save lives. You want to help people, and you think that wearing sunglasses is good for humanity. So you try to build communities that believe in that one thing that you totally and completely believe in.
Hopefully that's backed up by evidence. Otherwise, it's
Yeah.
just an empty rhetoric where it's just someone getting people to wear sunglasses
Or-
without evidence
Or
for
buy sunglasses, right?
for anything substantive.
Yeah, yeah.
Like wear sunglasses, but why or what for? I mean,
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
the benefit or
Because,
what does it do?
It's healthy or whatever reason.
Healthy for that person, but
Yeah.
what's his evidence for
Yeah.
saying wearing sunglasses all the time is healthy?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
these are things we
Yeah.
that people look into, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it has to be backed up by some
By
evidence.
proof, some sort of proof, right?
Yeah. But that's why in this world there are many like fake teachers, con artists, or daghan mangilad, or as you say, mga mong.
Mm.
So daghan mga mong, daghan mailad. So, but it's also dependent on the individual, how they discern on what's objectively true or what's just like cliche or mao na. That's why it's important na di ta mailad sad ba sa kadaghan kabuang kalibutan.
There are other things that have complicated the human condition, Mike, and I think one of the one of the greatest disturbances that we have in the human force, to make a Star Wars reference, is technology, right? And technology has sort of changed the way we
Yeah.
operate as human beings, like social media, for example, like technology, like cell phones, computers, and all that stuff. It has become easier for us to access information, to remember things. They used to have a huge ass library, the Library of Alexandria, thousands of years, hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
It was an entire building of books, and we used to have libraries back then, but now it's just at the palm of your hands. So how do you think technology has affected the human condition?
I think it's a double-edged sword because technology, all the advancements that we're experiencing with iPhones, computers, AI, and all that, is also a testament of the wonders of what we're capable of. It's a testament of human brain power and intelligence that we're able to discover and build these things, innovate new things. But there's a downside to it. Like maybe our kids turn out lazier, or everything's just at the push of a button. That it's like certain things are taken for granted and technology is abused. So it's really how we handle it. Like it's how we manage technology and how we utilize it. Sometimes it can be utilized for the good, or sometimes it can be utilized to do like bad things or unsubstantive things. So it's really how we use it. Similar with money, how money is amoral. Like it can be used to invest in businesses, create employment, or it can be used for drugs and prostitution and all that. So it's really the responsibility of how we use these things. So it's dependent on
So where do you think
how
where
its
do you
usage.
think this is all going? Social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
Well, there are
AI,
downsides.
Self-driving cars, all this computing power that's just, improving exponentially and
Well, yeah, like Facebook.
learning people that can computers that can learn. The new neural link idea now that you can supposedly be able to download your brain into a computer and all that stuff. Where do you think this is all leading to? What are your thoughts on that? as far as the
Well,
human condition is concerned?
well, it's dependent. As I said, like there's a threat that AIs could overtake us, and it could be hard for us. Or even, for example, like with Facebook, it's good that we're able to communicate so closely, but there's also the downside with a lot of fake news coming out, or that's causing a lot of chaos for the world, where the truth is even more watered down. So it's really how we as humans take on that.
There was a survey, I think this was in the United States, that trust in media, traditional media, is at an all-time low. So what does this mean? And I think that's also probably partially true here in Asia, in the Philippines. I think people are beginning to mistrust traditional, media. These big companies that have been trusted for so many years, all of a sudden people don't trust them anymore. Where do you think this is leading? I mean, like, can anybody just make a news outfit in his pajamas in his bedroom and blurt out stuff, and people will believe in that person? How do you think will we be able to find out what the truth of the matter really is?
I think that's the ultimate challenge, how we discern what's real and what's not. So it's very important that we stay objective, we stay rational, we use our brains the right way and not be driven by our feelings. That's the sad part with what's happening with our world now. It's that people are so easily triggered. They're all feelings driven. So it's easy to be misled these days. So it's important that we discern truth the best way we can.
So, but how? But let me give you an example. Facebook, like you said, there's so much fake news out there. Let's just say, for example, the one that we mentioned earlier, the flat Earth thirst, right?
Mm.
You see a flat Earth video, for example, on Facebook, and then you Google flat Earth, and then you go deep in that flat Earth rabbit hole, and sooner or later you're gonna get convinced because you researched on that particular thing, because there's millions of people who actually believe that the Earth is flat. So how do you make sure that that doesn't happen to anyone?
Well, first, I think the first step
Impossible,
is to not be intellectually lazy. Like, of course, we do our research the best way we can, as opposed to just nodding along. So you have to check sources and all that. But that's a great challenge, and I know there's no quick solution to that. But yeah, hopefully we discern what's real and what's not. And it's hard, but I'm sure we can somehow sense that if we really sincerely want to dig for truth, then the truth would eventually prevail.
Yeah, but you can't search for the truth on the same place where you bumped into this article or this idea, on the same platform that you bumped into it too. Like in my example, the flat earthers. If you're just going to dig deep in what flat earthers believe in, and then you're going to be stuck in that rabbit hole, like what happened to Kyrie Irving, right? He said he was a flat earther for a while, because he said he was searching and he got into the flat earth rabbit hole. That's what he said. So he was researching. He wasn't mentally and intellectually lazy. In fact, he did his homework and really.
But eventually he found out the earth wasn't flat.
Yeah. But he was convinced for a long time.
Yeah, but eventually the truth came out.
Yeah.
And like eventually, as he became more informed on what's true, eventually he changed his mind.
Yeah.
So I think, as I said, if one digs deep on what's real and isn't driven by feelings or subjectivity, but is driven by what's factual and what's objectively true, then I think that person will discover what's real along the way.
Do you think, since our topic is the human condition, do you think that being a human being is the best way of being? Do you think it's better to be a human being than to be a dog or a cow or a bird? Do you think it's the best game in town to be human? Because
Well,
I think
well,
to be
yeah.
able to compare and to have like a benchmark. Like this is a silly question, but I'd like to ask this question: do you think it's the best way of becoming? Like, would you rather be another life form?
Well, we have. Well, honestly, we have nothing to compare it to.
Yeah,
Like all
exactly.
our lives, given the
But we've seen
conscious.
dogs. I see
We
my
have
dog very
seen, but
happy.
we've never been a dog, or we can't fathom what it's like to be a dog, or
But do you
or
think?
even if we were a dog,
Do you
we can't grasp
do you
how it
suspect?
is to be a
Do you
dog.
have an inkling? Do you suspect that it's the best way of being, of existing, to be a human being?
I would think so, because as human beings, we were able to communicate, and like we're intelligent compared to like animals which are
So
driven
intelligence.
intelligence over animals whom are mostly driven by instincts, right? But we can't fathom being animals, so that's quite that's a question that's not answerable, because basically
But do you
our
think
experiences our
because
experiences all our lives
we
is being human,
we
so
claim to
we
be the
cannot grasp being a dog, and even if we were a dog, surely we can't grasp intellectual discussions or exchanging meaningful dialogue, because it's
we
limited,
claim to be the
because we have
smartest.
free will and intellect and all
We
that,
claim to be the smartest.
and we're able to dig up on abstract things.
We claim to be the smartest life forms, right?
Yeah.
Do you believe that?
Is there any comparison?
No, no. Do you think our intelligence has made us better life forms, better than a dog, or being a dog, or better than being a cow, or a bird, or a fish?
Definitely, because we're able to grasp deep things. We're able to set up buildings or make money.
Why is that? Why is that better?
And there's so much progress.
Why
and
is that better?
Because we're at a deeper level. But that can be a bad thing if, let's say, you wanna live an extremely simple life. Then it's different. I mean, the question, like, if I'd rather be a human being than an animal, like,
Nah, my question is it the best way of being, of existing? Because I'm looking at my
I have nothing to compare it to, so I would say
I'm
yes.
looking at my dog, and you get up and you work
So
hard.
you're saying you envy your dog because it's like he has no problems compared to you.
Exactly. He doesn't look like he's suffering. He doesn't look like he has satisfaction issues. All he wants to do is to get out of the morning, take a dump and get some
But
food.
that's entirely up to you. If, let's say, you want a simplistic surface life where it's just where like when we were babies, for example, that can be a good example. Like when we were kids, we weren't contemplating issues. So if we had such a simplistic outlook, yeah, maybe it would be problem free, but there would be no means to progress or any form of development.
So, but you have to define to a life form what progress is, right? And why progress. I always theorize, and I always say this every time I get into an argument about the human condition. The problem started when we decided to get out of the caves. I was referring to the cavemen because you were fine and dandy in the caves.
But then we did evolve, so then we became smarter.
and then we had to invent agriculture. And
But that's part of the development. We
Exactly.
got here.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting that we go back into
I don't know, man.
into ignorance and like simplicity?
I'm not sure what the answer to that question is. Part of me says, yeah, we should. In fact, I think there's got to be a part of me that wants to go back to the good old days. Like, for example, less traffic, for example. I'll give you an example. All of this development that's going on in the city now, all these buildings, all these cars, is causing all this congestion, right?
Yeah.
So part of me says, yeah, we gotta. I want the old Cebu back.
You
There's a part
prefer
of me that says that.
a simpler life.
Less traffic life, at least.
But then there were no iPhones then, or there was less technology. So you would have preferred like
Actually going to the person's house if you want to talk to them.
like writing a snail mail and all that.
I wouldn't have known any better.
So I don't know, but you were born in this particular period of time, so
So they were.
there's no choice there. I mean, you're here, you're alive now, and this is these are your circumstances.
they were suffering. Those people, back in the dark ages.
But they also had their own problems. Like if you compare us to the 1960s, yeah, sure, maybe simpler life, but things were also slower back then, or money was
the medical advancements.
Yeah.
There was no painkillers back then. There was no
Yeah.
penicillin and all that stuff,
so,
right?
yeah, like there's good and there's bad.
They say that we
there
all
are benefits and downsides to
They
it.
all say, Mike, that we're all suffering from the ignorance of our time.
The ignorance of
Our time. I'm sure there are so many things that we are ignorant about today that would be known 100 years from now, or even 50 years from now. The
For
way
sure,
discoveries are
and
made
that's the human condition, because
Yeah.
we keep moving up, we keep progressing, and that's a testament of who we are and what we're capable of, as I kept mentioning earlier. So hopefully more progress, but hopefully we come up with solutions to these problems, because as we progressed more, you also encounter and see that many problems are arising.
now. So problems and suffering do not end just because there's progress, right?
Yeah, there's more suffering and there's more growth after.
So are you suggesting is the relationship between
definite-
progress and suffering inversely proportional?
In a way, they go hand in hand, but the last thing we would do is just remain stagnant, right?
Okay.
Or remain complacent and just not move a thing. Of course, the natural inclination is to discover new things, find meaningful things to do.
So being still is not an option for you, because you're saying that the worst thing that could happen is you to be stagnant. Stagnant, I think, is
You
synonymous
mean
to
individually or as a human race? What are you alluding to?
well, both.
Both.
Both as a
Exactly,
humanity and as,
as I'm saying,
as
like-
an individual. What's wrong with being still? What's wrong with being stagnant? What's wrong with being satisfied with where you are
Nothing.
right now?
There's nothing wrong with
So-
it. But
so-
if you would choose to live as a bum, like if you're jobless and you
No,
have no reason to wake
That's not
up,
the stillness that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the stillness of being content, of being satisfied, of being joyful with what is, and not long for anything else other than what is now. Be still.
well,
be
each
stagnant.
day, like today, there are tasks that we need to do, or there are challenges that we face. So it's inescapable. But if you say remain stagnant, like some people can be content, and like for example, a business can choose not to expand. But that's the thing with free will also, how
I have a
how one
thought
chooses.
I have a thought experiment for you, Mike. Why wouldn't you? Would you want to go and become a monk? Are you so? Would you be open to just going out there and leave everything behind, because you're saying this is a chaotic world? There's so much suffering.
No,
and all
I
that
would
stuff.
not want to be a monk. It's not what drives me. I don't think I would. I don't think it would give me meaning and satisfaction to live as a monk.
Mhm.
But that's my personal journey.
Mhm.
But if someone wants to be a monk and it gives them fulfillment, then more power to them.
Mhm. So you wouldn't want to become a person that just does this every day and
Does what every day?
just just think inwardly and meditate and
No,
just
I have many responsibilities, so I can't just contemplate on.
but in a way
things.
you're suffering from those responsibilities, right? Because responsibilities means doing this and doing that, so in a way that's some form of suffering, right?
Yeah.
So if you just
The
completely-
day-to-day
completely
decisions.
uprooted yourself from this situation now and became a monk somewhere in the Himalayas and just
No, because as I said, that wouldn't give me meaning and satisfaction, and that's not something I want to do. So no, I wouldn't want
You
to
would
live
wanna
as a
do-
monk.
So you would choose to suffer these things that you're suffering from right now, from work,
Yeah,
from your
based on
business.
how I approach my life and how I utilize my free will and the choices I make. Yeah, I wouldn't like choose to live as a monk and just like think all day
Meditate.
and meditate and not make an impact economically or socially, financially. No.
No, actually, a lot of business leaders talk to monks. They talk to them for advice and how to deal with the world.
Yeah, and perhaps those people just want a different perspective, or there are many reasons. I don't know why they would choose to speak to a monk, so that's on them. I wouldn't know.
Well, I guess they're more in touch spiritually more than most of us who are living the day to day.
Not exactly, because you can be a successful businessman and still be spiritual at the
Uh-huh.
same time. I don't
Okay.
think it's one or the other. Where, oh, if you're spiritual, that means you don't want to work or do business in the secular sense.
Uh-huh.
So I wouldn't necessarily
But then again,
agree
that
with
word
that.
spiritual is kind of
Because actually, spirituality is used as businesses now.
yeah.
Like most organized religion, it's really a business.
Mhm.
But they use spirituality or like belief in some
Whatever, right?
god or whatever. That's being used and exploited
Yeah.
to make a few
To make a
people
living.
wealthy, to make a living. But it really depends. It's really relative.
Relative.
It's subjective. It's
Yeah.
relative. So there are many layers to your
To being a
question.
human being,
So
right?
so I don't know if you're asking to really dig deep on a subject, or do you have certain biases that you're
Of course, we
referring
all
to?
have biases. I mean, like you can't.
Yeah,
really-
of course. You have we're driven by both subjective and
Yeah,
objective
yeah.
inclinations.
I mean, like I don't know any person who doesn't have a bias.
But if
think
I
what-
may ask, what made you ask the question regarding the monk? Do you is there a
No,
what
I happened to come across a book called "The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari," and because being in this world, being in business in this world, is like you said, it's chaotic. It's got so many problems. You got this and that, so many responsibilities, bills to pay, and all that stuff. And it seems to me that if you could afford to just pluck yourself out and go to the Himalayas and just meditate.
some do that, some go on a retreat, right?
Yeah.
Like
For
some are
months on end, right?
some are caught up and they want to escape
And
for
they
a
don't
while.
go, they don't go back. I remember
That depends.
I remember Dave Chappelle. I don't know if you know his story. When he was doing the Dave Chappelle show, he was offered a gazillion dollars to do another show, and he dropped everything and said no to that contract and went on a sabbatical for years. We're not talking about months, we're talking about years. I think he went to India or something like that, and he eventually found himself and was offered $500 million to do something else. So in a
Yeah.
way, it kind of helped him actually make more.
Yeah, but that was his choice to
Yeah,
go
yeah.
on a sabbatical, and it was his choice to come out of that and go back because of
the pressures of Hollywood, I guess.
Yeah, but people chase after different things, so
Yeah, yeah.
that's why
So
it's a different journey for everyone.
It's all relative to be a human being. It is different for you and me and for Mike. We're all originals of our species. And I think it's safe to say that whatever your journey is, whatever their journey is, Mike, I think maybe you can help them help us in giving us some ideas, some final thoughts, final parting words on how do you think, on a general sense, should we soldier on this journey of being a human being?
Take on responsibilities and find something meaningful and fulfilling for you to do, and that's something only you yourself can discover on your own. That's it. Yeah.
I know you're a very well-read person, Mike. Maybe you can
Not really that well read.
suggest or recommend some
I don't
books?
really read as many books, but I'm trying to. But I
Yeah.
wouldn't consider myself well read.
Okay, maybe you have some suggestions and maybe some reads about the human condition, what it is, what it means to be human being. Do you have any? Or maybe
I
spirituality
guess
and all that stuff.
the Bible would be a good help.
Okay.
I mean, the Bible has so much wisdom in it.
Okay.
I mean, it's a 2,000 plus year book, so
Okay.
I mean, people get into
Aside from the Bible,
different
anything else?
studies about the Bible and still can't figure it out or have difficulty like reading it one time. Well, there are books, as I mentioned, Jordan Peterson. There's 12 Rules for Life, and he has a new book coming, a sequel to 12 Rules for
What is
Life,
it called?
which is Beyond Order.
Wow.
Another 12 Rules for Life,
Okay.
which can eradicate the chaos or like a guide to
Can eradicate chaos. A book that can eradicate chaos. What are
Yeah.
you talking about, bro? What do you mean?
antidote to chaos. Of course, like it's somewhat of a guide on how to like
It's like us
deal
not-
with the chaos and bring things into order. Because our life it's divided into chaos and order, but we try our best to set our life in order. Otherwise, everything would be in disarray, and yeah, it would further complicate matters and make our life more difficult. So yeah, those are some books, and maybe a few self-help books. I'm not sure exactly, but there's yeah, I think that would be a good start. Peterson, Jordan Peterson. He's like he just became famous the past few years. So
I actually
and he's shaken up a lot of
He's Canadian, right?
yeah,
Or something like that.
yeah, from Canada. He
Yeah.
was from Canada.
And I think he got famous in Canada for disagreeing on some sort of.
But
a
yeah,
law
people are
or-
free to read various books on self-help or any book that can hopefully an objective book that isn't filled with cliches, because there are some books that are filled with so much highfalutin words but they don't really go deep or they lack in depth.
Yeah.
So some books, they look good, sound good, but when you dig deeper, it doesn't really address anything. It's merely on the surface. So hopefully books that are real and not cliche, and that don't just look good externally, but books that have depth and substance.
Depth and substance. I think that's what we're both aspiring for. Our lives as human beings, to have some sort of depth, some sort of substance. I know we're just scratching the surface of this subject matter. I mean, who am I to have thought of talking about this subject matter? But I did anyway, right? And thank you so much for joining me, Mike.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
human condition. Who the hell do we think we are?
Yeah, who are we? But it's part. You struggle, I struggle,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
we're all trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
Because we could die anytime, and of course we wanna seek something meaningful
Yeah.
before we, go to our graves. Because time goes by really fast, and we're working and we're struggling. So it's important to dig deep into the substantive things.
The substantive things. I know you don't like cliches, but one philosopher once said, "An unexamined life is a life not worth living." Thank you so much for watching the Philosopher Podcast. Our topic for today, like I said, is a pretty ambitious one. The human condition. Suffering, satisfaction, and other stuff that make it awesome yet tragic to be human. My man here, EVP of Gateway Philippines, Michael Goho, you're going to hear a lot from him, and we're going to talk about stuff like that. We'd like you to join us in our conversations, okay? And we'll keep this conversation going, hopefully, on the social media platforms and all the podcast platforms. Thank you so much, guys. My name is Jiggy Jr., and you take care, okay?